I am deeply aware of this great inheritance and of the duties and heavy responsibilities of sovereignty, which have now passed to me.
Health news about the monarch always captures the nation's attention. This time, the palace's statement about King Charles has left many unsettled. It's not just another royal update. It's something that has stirred both concern and sympathy across the country. People are now wondering what this means for the king and how serious the situation truly is. Could this be the moment that changes everything within the royal family? Join us as we look at the palace's confirmation of the tragic news about King Charles's health. King Charles's journey with cancer and duty. Back in February 2024, Buckingham Palace announced that King Charles had cancer, which was discovered by his doctors after what was meant to be a simple procedure for an enlarged prostate. It was supposed to be minor, but further tests brought unexpected results. The palace quickly shared that it wasn't prostate cancer, but didn't specify the type. Still, the word cancer alone was enough to shake the nation. It marked the first major health challenge of his time as king, and people across Britain were left anxious but hopeful. At that time, Charles had only recently settled into the throne. His first year as king was filled with travel, meetings, and charity work. A busy schedule that showed his energy and sense of purpose. So when the diagnosis came, it caught even his closest aides off guard. Yet, the palace assured everyone that His Majesty remained positive, in good spirits, and committed to his duties despite starting treatment immediately. 2 months later, in April, he made his return to public life. His first appearance after treatment said more than words ever could. He visited a cancer treatment center, met patients, and spoke warmly about the importance of early detection. Many saw it as a brave act, a monarch standing face to face with a disease he was personally battling, choosing to lead by example. But behind that strength was a careful balance. Each step of his public schedule was planned around his treatment. Doctors were consulted before every trip, meeting, or ceremony. Some visits were canceled, others postponed. The king was working, but on the advice of his medical team, he was also learning to pace himself. Even so, Charles never completely stepped back. He continued holding weekly meetings with the Prime Minister, reviewed state papers daily, and maintained his diplomatic commitments. There was a quiet determination in how he worked. It was not to prove something, but because duty had always been part of who he is. Publicly, he looked thinner but cheerful. During walkabouts, he smiled, waved, and even shared light moments with well-wishers. There were days he looked tired, and some events were canceled on medical advice, but he always found a way to reappear with calm and grace. His courage gave hope to many going through similar struggles. By the summer of 2024, the palace shared that his treatment was progressing well. Still, doctors warned that recovery would take time. Some days were easier than others. In private, Charles stayed engaged, writing letters, joining video calls, and encouraging Queen Camilla as she took on more duties. And now, with this latest update from the palace, those earlier months take on new meaning. The careful scheduling, the absences, the smiles that masked fatigue. All of it now paints a clearer picture of a king who's been fighting quietly, giving his best while knowing the battle was far from over. When the recent news broke from the palace about King Charles's health, attention quickly turned to these months leading up to it. Many began asking whether the signs had been there all along. His busy diplomatic schedule had already pushed the limits of his recovery, and behind every official photograph, there were efforts to balance royal duty with medical care. Earlier in the year, the palace had confirmed plans for a state visit to the Vatican. It was supposed to be one of the most symbolic moments of his reign. The king was to meet the Pope in Rome, a meeting of two leaders known for their shared focus on climate change and global peace. But just as arrangements neared completion, the visit was called off. Officially, it was said to be due to the Pope's own health. Still, many royal watchers noticed how the announcement came at a time when the king himself was continuing treatment. The delay reminded everyone that his health required careful management, even when the public narrative remained hopeful. Despite that setback, Charles was not ready to slow down completely. Weeks later, Buckingham Palace confirmed that he and Queen Camilla would travel to Italy. The visit had been in planning for months, and some advisors reportedly suggested postponement. But Charles insisted on going, determined to show strength and continuity. He knew that each appearance mattered, not just for Britain's image abroad, but for reassuring the nation that he remained committed to his role. In Italy, the king's schedule was carefully adjusted. He met with President Sergio Mattarella at the Quirinale Palace, held private talks with Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, and addressed members of the Italian Parliament. His speech touched on shared values, environmental cooperation, and the importance of maintaining strong diplomatic ties in uncertain times. Those present described his tone as calm and thoughtful. Yet there was no ignoring the moments when he paused or when aides adjusted the pace of events to accommodate his condition. Queen Camilla's presence was more prominent than ever. She attended solo engagements, visited cultural institutions, and represented the monarchy at public dinners when the king needed to rest. To many observers, this marked a transition. Camilla was becoming not only a supportive partner, but also an essential figure in keeping royal duties running smoothly. The Italian state visit, while outwardly successful, showed how delicate the king's situation had become. Every handshake and public appearance was weighed against medical advice. Palace doctors were said to be monitoring his condition daily, ensuring that he did not overexert himself. Yet, those close to him said he viewed each trip as part of his promise to serve, no matter the personal challenge. Even after returning to London, the signs of strain were visible. His schedule remained full, but his team made subtle changes: fewer public walkabouts, shorter speeches, and controlled press access. It was all designed to protect his health while keeping the monarchy visible. These efforts to maintain balance came under even more scrutiny after the palace's latest statement. Many now look back at those foreign visits and realize how much he had pushed himself to keep up appearances. At the time, it was seen as admirable dedication. Now, in the light of new developments, it feels like a warning that the king's body had been asking for rest long before anyone admitted it. Yet no one expected what came next, when quiet concern inside the palace turned into sudden alarm over his health. The king's hospitalization. As the palace's latest statement spread across the country, many recalled the incident earlier this year that first exposed how fragile the king's situation had become. It began on 27 March 2025, when King Charles was admitted to hospital following a round of scheduled cancer treatment. The visit had been planned in advance, but what followed drew far more attention than anyone expected. According to reports at the time, the king experienced temporary side effects linked to his ongoing therapy. Doctors recommended that he remain under observation for a short while. Buckingham Palace quickly released a statement describing it as a temporary precaution and stressed that there was no emergency. Still, even that careful wording could not calm public concern. The very idea of the monarch spending a night in hospital after months of fighting illness sent ripples through the nation. Inside the palace, the atmosphere shifted. Aides worked through the night to manage both the situation and the growing media interest. Every phone call and every update was measured as officials tried to keep speculation under control. The goal was to reassure the public without exposing more than necessary. Yet the sight of medical teams entering and leaving the hospital told its own story. The king's condition, though described as stable, was serious enough to need careful supervision. By the next day, Buckingham Palace announced that Charles had been discharged and had returned to Clarence House to rest. His doctors were satisfied with his progress, and aides said his spirits were high. Engagements that had been planned for that week, including a trip to Birmingham, were postponed. The palace emphasized that it was simply to give him time to recover fully. Still, the news made many wonder how much strain his body was enduring behind the scenes. A few days later, the king reappeared in public. It was a brief moment, but it carried weight. Cameras caught him leaving Clarence House, waving to well-wishers as he headed to a private meeting. He looked slightly thinner, but alert and composed. Palace sources described him as in good form, insisting that his treatment was progressing as planned. Those few images showing him smiling were widely shared across news networks and social media. For many, it was a relief. Even so, the hospitalization left a lasting mark. It revealed how quickly the palace had to balance transparency with privacy. The public wanted reassurance, yet too much detail could create panic. Charles himself reportedly disliked the fuss. Friends said he viewed the incident as a routine medical matter that did not need headlines. But the reality was different. Every movement of a reigning monarch carries symbolic weight, and his hospital stay reminded the world that even kings are not immune to frailty. Behind the scenes, adjustments began quietly. His team reviewed travel schedules, and advisors spoke of reducing the length of ceremonies. Doctors were said to be working closely with palace staff to make sure his recovery was steady. Each step since that hospitalization was taken with extra caution, not because of fear, but because everyone now understood how delicate his balance between duty and health had become. What began as a quiet medical observation soon turned into a full-scale operation to manage information. Officials met behind closed doors, statements were drafted and redrafted, and aides were reminded of the rule that no one speaks out of turn. Still, in the age of instant news, silence only travels so far. Within hours, journalists began piecing together details from unnamed sources. Some reports spoke of postponed engagements, others of concern within the royal household. The palace's first statement, meant to calm the situation, did the opposite. It described the hospital stay as a short period of observation and spoke of temporary side effects from treatment. There were no medical terms, no diagnosis, no specifics. The intention was to protect the king's privacy, but the lack of detail left too much space for guessing. Television channels ran constant updates, each trying to interpret what temporary might mean. Radio discussions turned emotional as callers shared messages of support and worry. Newspapers printed contrasting headlines, with some saying the king was recovering well, while others hinted at something far more serious. The palace stayed silent. Its goal was to project calm, yet the quiet only deepened public unease. Inside the Royal Communications Office, staff faced a growing challenge. They were used to managing attention, but this was different. Every word was being weighed by doctors, advisors, and family members. One wrong phrase could create panic. One slip of information could breach the king's privacy. Officials relied on carefully chosen language, but even that wasn't enough. The uncertainty spread beyond Britain. International outlets began covering the story, linking it to the king's earlier public appearances and his visibly reduced schedule. Each image of Charles looking tired was replayed, analyzed, and compared. Commentators wondered if the palace was downplaying the seriousness of his condition. The lack of clear information made even routine updates sound suspicious. At home, people gathered in front of televisions, scrolling through news feeds, hoping for clarity. Supportive messages flooded social media, but there was also frustration. Many asked why the palace couldn't simply say what was wrong. Others reminded that even monarchs deserve medical privacy. The debate itself showed how deeply the nation cared, but also how little it trusted the official tone of calm. Behind the scenes, the royal household worked to find balance. They wanted to protect the king's dignity, while managing the expectations of a restless public. Doctors continued to brief senior aides, while private secretaries tried to prepare new statements. Each decision felt like walking a tightrope between duty and discretion. As the silence stretched on, speculation turned into fear. The more the palace held back, the louder those questions became. And now, as we're about to reveal, while uncertainty deepens, another story centered on Queen Camilla herself is beginning to take shape. Steadfast support amidst King Charles's health challenges. When the palace began changing the king's diary, Queen Camilla stepped forward, and not in small ways. She started taking on more solo engagements. She greeted visiting ambassadors. She attended cultural events and official dinners. People noticed that when Charles needed rest, she stayed in the spotlight and made sure the crown still had a public face. Those moves read like two simple facts. First, Camilla is supporting her husband. She is helping to shield him from long days and heavy travel. Second, she is now helping decide which events are safe and which are not. Staff began routing invitations through her office. Schedules that once went straight to the king were filtered. Reports and briefings passed to a smaller circle before they reached him. That made a practical difference. It cut down pressure on the king. It also gave Camilla control over who could see him and when. Camilla was steady, polite, and visible. She never sought headlines. She simply kept engagements running while doctors advised pauses for the king. At public events, she smiled and thanked organizers. She answered questions with short, warm notes and moved on. To many, that looked like a loyal partner doing what needed doing. But inside those same rooms, another tone had started to whisper. Insiders told reporters that Camilla had begun shaping messaging. She checked speeches and worked with communications staff on how to present updates about the king. She met privately with senior aides and medical advisors to map out which appearances could go ahead. That level of influence is normal for a working consort. What changed was the urgency behind it. With one man's health in question, every choice felt weighty. That urgency created two very different public stories. One version is compassion and care. Camilla is protecting the king's dignity. She keeps him out of long flights and keeps the public view calm. The other version is about power. When scheduling and access tighten around a single advisor, questions follow. Who decides what the public hears? Who decides who stands beside the king? And how quickly does a consort's role grow into authority when the monarch can no longer keep the same pace? The change was practical, and it was political at the same time. Camilla's visible work allowed the monarchy to function day to day. Yet the closer she moved to the center of decisions, the more scrutiny she drew. Journalists asked if that was right. Courtiers quietly wondered whether that arrangement would hold if the king's condition changed again. Supporters said she was simply filling a gap to keep the country steady. Critics said the palace had to be more open. As people watched her attend more key events, they also watched the reactions around her. Staff adjusted. Schedules shortened. Private meetings multiplied. The line between care and control blurred. Who she kept close and who she kept distant now mattered in ways it did not before. For Prince William, the past year has felt like walking a tightrope. Every time the king's health makes headlines, the pressure shifts to him. He is the heir, but also a son watching his father face something deeply personal. In public, he smiles and carries out his duties. In private, those close to him say the weight shows. Since early 2024, William has spoken about how brutal the year has been for the royal family. His words came after long weeks of uncertainty. First, the diagnosis, then the treatment, and then the brief hospitalization. Behind the formal statements and polite smiles lies the reality that each update about the king's condition forces William to face what could come next. He knows the monarchy depends on him staying calm, but he also knows every show of strength is being measured for something larger: readiness. At home, the pressure reaches deeper. Catherine, recovering from her own health challenges, and their 3 children have endured constant public focus. Every photo, every rare outing, is analyzed. William has always tried to protect their privacy, but now, even his absence from an event becomes a headline. Friends say he finds that part hardest, trying to be both a present father and a prepared king in waiting. The tension shows in how he divides his days. One half is filled with briefings, red boxes, and constitutional updates. The other half belongs to his family, who want normal life as much as possible. Inside the palace, preparations continue. Senior advisors have reportedly encouraged William to review transition plans, protocols that outline what happens if the king steps back or needs longer treatment breaks. It is not a pleasant task, but it is necessary. Those meetings are done quietly behind closed doors. William does not want it to look like he's waiting in the wings. He knows every move can be read as ambition, when all he wants is time for his father to recover. That hesitation has created a visible contrast. Camilla has grown more assertive in managing day-to-day palace business, while William stays cautious, stepping forward only when essential. Some insiders see that as restraint, others see it as uncertainty. Yet those who know him say he is deeply aware of what's at stake. Every decision must balance emotion and duty, patience and preparedness. Publicly, William projects steadiness. His speeches focus on continuity, his visits highlight community and service, and his tone remains calm even when pressed about the king's health. The image is clear. He's ready when needed, but not in a hurry. For a nation watching closely, that stance brings mixed feelings. Some take comfort in his composure. Others wonder if he should be taking a more active role, preparing the transition more openly. That question now sits beneath every royal appearance. How long can William stand in the shadows before duty demands more? And when that moment comes, will it be a choice or a call he can no longer avoid? Keep watching, there's more. The weight of silence. The palace statement on King Charles's health was short, but its impact was huge. At this stage, the problem was not just the illness, but the silence around it. Buckingham Palace tried to calm the public, saying the king was receiving routine care, but people weren't convinced. Why postpone engagements if things were under control? Why avoid detail if everything was fine? It was a moment where reassurance and doubt lived side by side. As hours turned into days, television channels began replaying clips of Charles's past engagements. Images from his visit to Italy and earlier state meetings filled screens, reminding everyone of his usual energy and charm. The contrast with the present felt sharp. Broadcasters spoke softly, repeating the same questions. What had changed? And how serious was it? That was when the first real wave of tension hit. The king's role is mostly symbolic, but that symbol carries weight. When a monarch is unwell, people see more than an individual's health. They see uncertainty about leadership, stability, and continuity. In a country still adapting to a new era after the Queen's passing, the thought of another transition felt too heavy to bear. Meanwhile, global attention grew. World leaders began sending formal messages of concern and support. In Washington, Ottawa, and Canberra, officials spoke publicly about their hope for the king's recovery. Commonwealth representatives described him as a figure of unity and a source of calm. Behind those words, though, diplomats discussed the need to adjust schedules and formal visits that depended on his availability. Back home, the press took on a sharper tone. Each day brought new commentary from royal watchers and medical experts. Some claimed the palace was downplaying the issue, while others said too much speculation risked panic. Tabloid headlines hinted at behind-the-scenes concern, though few facts supported those claims. Still, every story fed public anxiety, keeping the nation in a constant state of watchfulness. The situation was no longer just about one man's illness. It had become a moment that touched the country's sense of certainty and pride. Every small update mattered. Every pause in information brought more questions. Gone are the scenes of packed schedules and state arrivals. In their place are smaller, carefully managed appearances, designed to remind the public that Charles is still at the center of his role. He continues to receive daily government papers, holds audiences with ministers, and speaks regularly with the Prime Minister. At Clarence House, the King has resumed what aides call a hybrid routine. Some days are spent meeting advisors face-to-face, others working from his study. Sources say he remains disciplined, determined not to let illness define his reign. His staff describe him as focused, if cautious. The palace has made sure to project stability. Each statement released has carried the same calm tone, that the king's recovery is progressing, that his medical team is pleased, and that he is looking ahead to future duties. Behind those words, however, there is still a sense of uncertainty. Doctors have advised patience, reminding everyone that cancer treatment requires time and careful balance. Charles has had to cancel or delay several visits abroad, including engagements that once seemed certain. Still, his aides have confirmed that he hopes to return to a fuller schedule soon. Those who saw him during his recent outing described him as looking brighter, if thinner. One observer said he seemed relieved to be back among people, even though his appearances are shorter than before. The visit was framed as routine, but its real message was reassurance. For a public that had grown uneasy with silence, seeing the king walk unaided and smile in public mattered more than any press release. Officials say the hospital visit that caused concern was a minor bump, not a setback. They add that the overall direction remains positive. His treatment continues under close medical supervision, and progress is being made. But the pressure around him has not eased. Alongside his recovery, the king must still manage diplomatic plans that cannot wait. State visits are being reshaped around his availability, and many foreign leaders have sent private messages of support. Every such gesture carries political meaning. Inside the palace, staff are reviewing the calendar with new caution. Nothing is confirmed until it has to be. The Queen has stepped in for several duties, allowing the king to rest when needed. She continues to represent him at public events, and this quiet teamwork has become one of the defining traits of their reign so far. For now, optimism outweighs fear. Palace officials repeat that engagements will be rescheduled, not cancelled. Yet, beneath the calm statements, a question remains: how long can this pace last? The king's dedication is clear, but so is the fragility revealed by recent months. His recovery may be moving in a positive direction, but it has exposed the fine balance between leadership and well-being that every monarch must face. And with each passing week, Britain watches not only for his return, but for signs of what the next chapter will bring. Do you think King Charles will fully recover and continue leading for years to come? Or are we watching the beginning of a royal transition? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear them. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the following video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.